Welcome to the Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm the Reverend Kendra Graham's pastor of First Presbyterian Church here in Hudson, and I am honored to host some of my colleagues from the wider Hudson area today for some ongoing conversation about the COVID-19 pandemic and its far-reaching effects on the health of people within our community at large, including economic impacts, and how we continue as faith communities, as people of faith, to move intentionally through this time, particularly here in the midst of December, this time that in faith in Christian communities we observe as very sacred. So today I am honored in this conversation to host Larry Szyman, pastor at Faith Community Church here in Hudson, Michele Arndt, pastor of the Crossing Covenant Church in Houlton, and Pastor Carolyn Staats of Mount Zion Lutheran here in Hudson. And so to kick it off, wanted to reflect on something we have all experienced during this time, that great change and adaptation has been required in the midst of everything we've been facing. And one thing I've noticed, that all that change and adaptation has a way of kind of stripping away false facades and really challenging us to get to our core values and those things that are most important to us, and really living from those values and those places. So I wanted to invite us to start by reflecting a little bit on what we've each discovered about our faith communities and our core values during this time, and how we are really leaning on those and embracing those as we continue to move forward. So Larry, can I kick it over to you first?
Sure. And the specific question is that I lost my video there.
So the specific question, what are the kind of core values that have been reinforced or maybe unveiled at Faith Community during this time, and how are you really leaning on those as you continue to move forward?
Yeah, so there's two things that I think have really happened. One is that the pressure and stress of COVID-19 has uncovered aspects of our heart that we are not too pleased with. And I myself, number one, that one of my really high values in life is comfort. I found that out. And it's been taken in some, not a huge manner, but a real manner during this season, as well as for the church, a number of levels, from not being able to touch and hug those you love, to wearing a mask you're not particularly fond of, and all the implications of, trying to be mindful of our neighbor. But so I think that that's been a big one for me, is recognizing just we're so used to life working in America, and when it doesn't, we're offended, and something inside of us gets attacked, and our tendency to be kind to our neighbors, kind to those closest to us, is challenged, and we see ugliness. And so that's one of the things we're learning about who we are. In terms of the core values, that we found I've been personally challenged, and we've been challenged our people to keep our nose grounded in the scripture, which is an ancient writing, but has all sorts of relevance about how we treat one another and what's ruling our hearts in any day-to-day situation. It gives us the opportunity to hope, and challenges us to deny ourselves and to love our neighbors at a time when, in our discomfort, we want others to take care of us. So those are a few things.
Thank you. Absolutely. I think I'm right there with you. I have also had unveiled for me all of the little comforts that I relied so much upon and have had to be very humble about. Michele, what about you and the Crossing Covenant? What has been unveiled, reinforced during this time, and how are you intentionally moving forward, leaning on your core values?
Yeah, I think I'm going to tug on where Larry left off and where you commented as well, Kendra. I mean, I think on some level, all of us, even people who maybe would not call themselves Christians or followers of Jesus, are wrestling around this idea of like, what does it mean to love your neighbor? And our mission statement at the Crossing, we chose it very simply, like the Matthew 20:22, like love God, love others. That's our mission. And there's so many ways that plays out. But I think, this just exposed that we do have other desires. And I think for us as a new baby church, Maybe one of the desires that got poked at a little bit is, we haven't even reached cruising altitude yet. And so to have some of the normalcy and the structure removed when we were barely even established in some of those rhythms was really hard. And right behind it, I would say, I think it kind of reframed the way to kind of tug on what Larry shared about comforts. I think I see for myself personally and as a pastor, the ways that money can get tangled up in that. And it was really tempting to want to forsake some of the commitments we made when we opened our doors to be giving. And it's like, well, wait a minute, what are we going to do if? And it's like, well, hold on a minute. Isn't your mission statement to put God first, seek first the kingdom, his righteousness, and then love your neighbor and let the rest just land where it needs to? So I think those have been some challenging things for us. I'm sure we'll get into this in some of the other questions, but I think the added piece of some of the racial things that kind of snowballed up into the pandemic, especially for us locally here in Minneapolis with George Floyd, has kicked up some other dust that has put some important questions in front of us.
Great. Thanks for those good reflections, Michele. Carolyn, and what about you and Mount Zion? What's been revealed or reinforced, and how are you living from those core values during this time?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the primary things that we've discovered is just how crucially important worship is for our community. That's where a lot of effort and energy has been focused, for me in the pastoral role, but especially for the smaller church community feel that we have, worship really is a time to gather and to praise. Like there's such a holiness that comes with being in community, even from afar. And from the early stages of this, it's been really rewarding and really important for people to see their beloved church family. And so we've been getting a lot of different people involved in worship in different ways. And so that's been logistically challenging, but really rewarding in terms of keeping our community quite strong in the midst of all of this. And I also think with that, it's been worship and outreach ministries that have been particularly strong in this time too. We have a lot of different outreach and mission opportunities at Mount Zion, and that's been really important for people too, even like adapting our giving tree. And for the month of November, the volunteer staff was basically all Mount Zion people for the whole month. And so that was really cool to see that even with some adaptations, that a lot of those things were still able to carry on. And, there's an old adage where there's a will, there's a way, and, and God has certainly put that will to worship and to serve others in the hearts of people at Mount Zion. I've really seen that. And so, with that, we have found ways to make it happen. And I'm just really grateful, echoing what Michele was saying too, loving God, loving neighbors. That's really at the core of a lot of what we're doing. And I'm grateful to see how that has turned out in this season.
Wonderful. Yeah. And as an extension of that question, I know this time has called us at First Presbyterian to online worship in new ways via Zoom. And one of the joys we've discovered is it's allowed us to reconnect with some people who hadn't been able to be in worship regularly. Some homebound people, some snowbirds. I knew some of our other colleagues that I was talking with recently in a similar conversation reflected that. But I wonder, what is one thing that maybe has started during this time that now you're like, we can't go back. We can't let that go. That was a gift born of this time by God's Spirit and God's will. And we want to keep that going. Larry, is there anything like that at Faith Community that you'd lift up?
Yeah, I think there's a couple, one corporate, one personal. The corporate one would be that we've made a commitment that we're going to continue streaming no matter what. And that recognizing that there are people out there with needs that can't get to us. And I had a friend say to me, he said, I've used a word about the church that I never thought I would ever use, and that the church has been nimble lately. And so one of the upsides of the pandemic is it's knocked us off dead center and caused us to think differently. So we would see that one of the roles of the digital opportunities is an on-ramp to a deeper community, flesh on flesh. And it gives people an opportunity to see what they might be getting into. And we're actually seeing some of that already. So I'm seeing that on a personal level, I think, and this would apply to anybody, that one of the big things that's the good sides of what's happened personally is that things have slowed down and there are so many less options. And the question is, when the door opens, are we going to treat it like it's Black Friday and jump back into the hectic pace that was? Or are we going to sit and say, whoa, what does it mean to be a smart shopper and pace our lives and make decisions that be more life-giving?
A great question for all of us, both in faith communities and outside of faith communities. Absolutely. Michele, what about you? What's been born during this time that you hope you can continue indefinitely?
Kind of challenging to answer because, as I said, I mean, as a newer church, it's like, well, we're trying a lot of new things, and like many other churches, it took us some doing to figure out live streaming. We didn't quite have all of the resources that we maybe would have liked to, but I think one thing that comes to mind for me is just really sticking to the basics. I feel like I said something really similar when the four of us powwowed back in May, but I think it's interesting that my answer hasn't really changed. I think it's easy to become Sunday centric. And all of a sudden, when Sunday can't be the center the way it used to be, I think it forces us to say, what are the basic rhythms that we look to in our common belonging to a community of fellowship? And I feel like that's been reinforced for us. Like, I don't want to be a church that's got so much structure that, when the wind blows and takes a few of them out, everybody, panics and doesn't know what to do. So I think simplicity, the value of simplicity.
That's great. I hear that echoed also in what Larry shared. So themes emerging. Carolyn, what about you in Mount Zion?
Yeah, and I'm going to have to jump on the similar theme train for us too. We're really devoting a lot of time and energy into looking at what continuing an excellent online ministry presence would look like going forward. We're looking into some different worship technology projects and things like that to make sure that we can really reach out to a wide variety of people. And so it's a lot of what both you and Larry have mentioned, Kendra, about reaching out to folks that perhaps aren't able to make it to church regularly. And, whether that's because your little kid, spat up on you and you're already running 5 minutes late and it's just a bit of a chaotic morning, or if you're away at the cabin or you're a snowbird or, a whole variety of things. It's nice to be able to really provide a lot of different options for people in order to still really feel like they're a part of the church family. And so I think that, even though our building may be closed, the church itself is not closed, right? And I think that in this time, because we have had to do so much adaptability or adaptive things, so many adaptive things, that, we're really learning that we can do a lot of new and different things. And that, like Michele was saying, we're not entirely Sunday centric and we don't have to keep things up the way that we always have done them. And so I hope that as we, continue to move into the future, that we understand that sort of spirit of ingenuity and just trying new things and, seeing what the season requires. And Mount Zion's history is, very much rooted in that. We were founded by Swedish immigrants 125 years ago, right? And so there's been a lot of seasons of adaptation over the course of that history. And just knowing who even founded this church in the first place, these are hardworking, adaptable people. And, I'm grateful that we can continue that kind of energy even now with the people who are a part of the church. So it's, I'm looking forward to seeing how things continue to journey on. As much as the season's been difficult, that's been a real beacon, is seeing that we can try new things and that, through Christ, new life emerges, even as certain things may pass.
Absolutely. Well, knowing that we're in the midst of December and in the church world, the season of Advent or preparation for welcoming the Christ child and God coming into our midst, one of the things we talk about often is hope. And I often remind myself, as well as others, that this isn't a sentimental hope, but really a tenacious hope. And to paraphrase St. Augustine, that hope has both elements of anger or recognition of what is not God's will in the moment. And also that hope encourages us, spurs us onward to keep seeking what God's dreams for the world are, those dreams that we believe were embodied in Jesus Christ. So my next question in this season, in this time, what are some of the hopes that you have, those places where you're recognizing that it's not quite there yet, not quite what God wants, and how are you embracing with courage what's next? So Larry, I'll turn back to you first.
I always get the first one, huh? All right. Well, it's interesting. I'm intrigued by your question. The anger part is that, so often what provokes change is something that we find such an affront that it moves us off dead center. And so this pandemic gives me anger, or it causes anger to rise up inside of me, because it's an affront to the good world God made, and it's attacking people, those who bear his image. And we want to fight against that through medical and neighborliness in such a way that we do all we can to eradicate it and put it back in its place. So there's plenty, the anger that within this context, obviously what took place in Minneapolis and its implication, what it magnifies, not only in Minneapolis, but major cities and in small towns like Hudson as well, in terms of our lack of neighborliness and how we treat our those around us. And so the hope comes, or courage. What I'm asking for is the courage to find the pockets, to walk into, to speak into, to live into, so that we offer an alternative. So for the division that's in our culture, obviously it's not only by race, it's by whatever sign you had on your yard last month, in that there's got to be another way to operate than the dominant paradigm being offered to us. And I believe Jesus gives that to us. And so to faithfully live that out in such a way that it becomes more compelling than the divisiveness in some of these more prevailing attitudes, and that even how we respond to the pandemic is, we're looking for the courage, and I think that will engender hope as we see something different, a different response to what's going upon us than anger and withdrawal.
Thank you for those good reflections. Michele, what would you add and build upon, or how would you answer that?
Yeah, I think as I thought about it, kind of again, drawing from Larry's response, I think what has provoked anger, both I would say in individuals, as I think about just, different members of our congregation, or even in myself, is this sense of disorientation around what we call political versus what we call spiritual, and then the divisions that occur when we're trying to correctly or incorrectly categorize what we're seeing happen in the real world. And I think that, whether it's, Larry mentioned a few of them, I think the racial events here in our community, beginning with George Floyd and the fallout of that, I think that's one thing. It's, the mask debates. It's like Larry referenced, who did you vote for last month? When all of these issues start colliding against what we think it means to be a follower of Jesus, and you say, well, Christians should talk about this, but not this. Or that's political and this is spiritual. I think the anger has come from the confusion around the unveiling, to go back to our first question, that we have a little bit of a divorced way of living of secular and sacred. And I think that's created a lot of confusion for a lot of people who would say, well, I'm a Christian, but I just don't think we should talk about that. And I think all of these conversations belong squarely in the middle of the church, because Jesus talked about these things. And so I think the hope that I have is that we can continue to create dialogue that keeps our real lives married to the gospel. And one of the ways that we sought to do that at the Crossing, because we could over the summer and have outdoor space, was to host a couple of gatherings that I called Dialogue on the Deck. So we did one in June that was around just kind of racial learning, introductory conversation, and it was really well attended and well participated in. And then a second one in August around what do we do when we vehemently disagree as followers of Jesus on big issues. And so, I think that the anger, courage, tension is there, and I'm committed to continuing to create dialogue spaces in hopes that people stay at the table, because sometimes anger means that some people actually leave the table, and I get sad about that. And so courage to me is, let's stay at the table and let's keep pressing into what Jesus would actually say about these things.
Good tensions to name. I think we have all experienced similar dynamics. Carolyn, what about you?
Yeah. So when you provided this quote, I found it so interesting that Hope's daughters are anger and courage. Like, that really gave me pause for a minute, because, I usually start with thinking about the anger piece, right? Of why people are angry, why there's so much anger going on right now. And then, when I think about it, anger is one of the most epitomal reactions to grief, right? It's denial, it's anger, it's bargaining, all of those kinds of classic things. And I feel like if we approach understanding our anger with also understanding our grief, it's going to allow us to really see each other as more human, right? Because we're all grieving, right? And anger is a very common trauma reaction too. I mean, this is collective trauma we're going through right now. Over 250,000 Americans have died. Like, this is huge. And there's a lot to grieve right now. We're grieving major life milestones. We're grieving the way that our lives were structured. Like, even some of the comfort things like we've named before, I miss going to yoga. I miss a lot of those things, right? We grieve not seeing our loved ones. And, there's this collective sense of loss. And I think that in order to really see the humanness behind that anger, the pain and the loss and the grieving that's there, that's what takes courage, right? Because it's a lot easier to lean into, oh, I'm going to stick with my tribe of who I agree with, and, down with the other side, and, all this divisiveness, down with anybody who disagrees with me. Well, we're acting out of a sense of self-preservation because we've lost something and we're hurting. And so it takes courage to see past that division and to actually get into that heart stuff, get into the vulnerability, and to really be open with the people around us. I've really appreciated a lot of the conversations that we've had as clergy colleagues too, because, not all of us agree on everything. And so I have really appreciated the relationships that have come from those conversations, and being able to learn and see the humanness behind the things that I disagree with. So that's what gives me hope, right? Perhaps it's a different journey than Augustine laid out back in the day, but you got to start with where you're at, right? Right now we're at the place of anger. So maybe if we lean into that courage, and I'm seeing it in little pockets, right? I see it in continuing relationships. I see it in people being willing to step up and serve their neighbor, right? And those are the kinds of things that give me hope. In the season of Advent, it's a very embodied season, talking about Mary's pregnancy journey, the birth of Jesus, right? Baptizing with water with John the Baptist, all those classic stories. And so I think that leaning into those different human aspects within this season of Advent, I really find hope in that too.
Thank you. Those are beautiful reflections. So in that spirit of leaning into hope, knowing we all want to move forward with intentionality. I know lots of people set resolutions at New Year's. I like to think of them more as intentions, right? Christian intentions or disciplines that I want to carry forward. So maybe as our wrap up, our final word, Michele, we'll kick it over to you first, perhaps this time, to share what is one intention as we turn the page on 2020 and all of the things it has brought. What's that one intention that you hope to carry forward into the new year?
Yeah, I think for us, it is an intention to not sweep hard conversations under the rug. And I think one of the obvious ones does continue to be matters of race. It's just one of those that for whatever reason, Christians start to really get the willies about. And I had committed to our congregation right after George Floyd. I came on that Sunday morning prior to church and just gave some expressions real time to say, I'm not going to treat this like just a little phase for a few weeks where we pay attention and then we move on, nor am I going to bang this drum until nobody wants to listen anymore, but I am committed to continuing the dialogue. And so in 2021, I'm teaming up with one of our other covenant pastors in Ellsworth, and we're going to be team teaching to each other's churches and to our own, a series in Corinthians that's going to start with unity in a time of division. And it's just one of the ways that I'm committed to keeping important conversations in front of our people, but keep them tied to our commitment to be in the Word meaningfully. And we're hoping to bring in on the Sunday before Martin Luther King Day, David Swanson, who is a covenant pastor, author of the book Rediscipling the White Church. He's a classmate of mine, and he's hoping to virtually preach to both of our churches that day to kick off a book study that we hope to do with both churches to do some learning together.
Great intention and great opportunities as we move forward in hope. Carolyn, briefly, what's your intention for the new year?
Yeah, so kind of my personal intention is also what my hope and intention is for Mount Zion too. I really want to start a more regular daily prayer practice and just really lean on that relationship with God. Right? If we're talking about hope coming from the courage to lean into relationship, then for me, I want to strengthen that relationship with God. And a lot of that has to do with prayer. And my intention with Mount Zion is to do a little bit more intentional time in teaching about different spiritual practices that we can lean into to strengthen our faith. Even when we're not able to gather in the building too. So I've got kind of a book study in the works. I've got some prayer ideas in the works. And so my intention is to help really strengthen the relationship with God, regardless of how we are gathering together as the body of Christ.
Great. And Larry, do I dare give you the last word with your intention for 2021?
We had a business meeting last week, which was a combination of people live and online. And when I started seeing all the faces populating on the screen for those zooming in, I just was missing people so desperately, and realized the capacity for at a time like this, because we are gathering, and understandably so, our numbers are only about 35-40% of what they were pre-COVID. And I just miss a lot of people. And so the one is that nobody falls through the cracks. And so right now we're seeking to double down to make sure that every person related to our community is having a regular touch with leadership, so that that doesn't happen, that they're actively being encouraged and just touched in some way in this weird season. So that's something I'm trying to get after.
Great. All wonderful, faithful intentions. I echo them as well. Wonderful commitments to the new year. And I know from my conversation recently with 3 other colleagues that this theme of connection is so important. And so as we wrap up here, I think I can speak for all of us in saying that we hope everyone in the Hudson community has that connection. However it's coming, we know it's probably different than it has been in years past, particularly during this season, but we hope that you have it during this season, that you can find it and you feel supported by the faith communities among us. So we wish you peace and good health and look forward to the next time we can share a conversation with you, with gratitude to the River Channel for hosting us as always.